You can't use alcohol markers in a bullet journal. Babe, no, that's a myth. I've been using alcohol markers in my bullet journal for 2 years now. No ghosting, no bleeding whatsoever. And I'm gonna share with you guys my secret trick in this video. I do want to give a shout out and thank Sanjoki for sponsoring this video. There's 120 alcohol marker sets I'm going to be using to compare to other markers in this video and show you how you can use alcohol markers in a bullet journal. These are a great alternative to a hoo-hoo. They have just a huge color range, and what's great about them also is they have double-ended tips. One side is a chisel nib and one side is a brush nib. You can get fine lines with it, but also thick lines. You can even do calligraphy with it if you wanted to. For a matter of saving time, I also swatched all these pens for you so you guys can see all the different color variations here. And like I said, the color range is gorgeous. They all have bright, saturated colors. Okay, but now I want to ironically talk about the issues with alcohol markers, because there's a reason we can't use them usually in a bullet journal, and that's because they bleed through. The ink is obviously made out of alcohol. It's an alcohol marker, so it's super pigmented, super saturated, but it bleeds through any paper. Hence why we usually use water-based markers instead. And this is like things like Crayola super tips, Tombow brush pens, Artlist markers, stuff like that. Those ones that we usually see are water-based pens, and they are not as strong, and they usually do not bleed through paper. To demonstrate my point, I'm going to be pulling out my Sanjoki art pad along with my Sanjoki protection page. I'm going to be comparing the Sanjoki alcohol markers to Tombow brush pens, which are pretty common bullet journaling water-based pens. I'm first going to be swatching everything in a thick and thin line, and then I'm going to be using the double-ended tips. So for the Tombow brush pen, it has a brush nib tip and then also has a fine tip, which is why there are not as many swatches on this one. For the alcohol markers, like I said, there's both a chisel and a brush nib, and you can get thin and thick lines with both ends, so they're super versatile. But as you'll see when I swatch them, the colors are pretty similar. In fact, if you looked at the caps, both greens are super similar. However, the alcohol marker comes off much darker and saturated on the page. Now I do want to mention alcohol markers usually do write darker and dry slightly lighter, whereas the water-based, they're going to write exactly how they dry. So that does kind of explain why the alcohol marker is slightly darker. If I flip over the page, you'll see that it definitely did bleed through the alcohol markers. Obviously, there's a lot of ghosting. And if you look on the left, there is zero ghosting from the water-based marker. So that's how you can tell literally water-based will not bleed through. Next, let's do a smudge test. So I'm just going to be writing smudge test in a basic ballpoint pen. Now I do want to mention this is a ballpoint, which means it's going to be a little more inky. If you use stuff like fine tipped fine liners, those are more felt based pens, so they're not going to spew as much ink onto the page. Gosh, that sounded terrible. Basically, it's not going to smear as much, but I'm using a ballpoint pen to show smearing even more clearly. So I'm going to test both pens after 10 seconds and 30 seconds of the ink drying and see how the marker on top smears it. Going first with a Tombow and again for the 30 seconds. And if we look up close, you'll see there is definitely smearing on the water-based side. So this is what we do not want. If you look at it up close, you can see that the black has made some streaks to the right following the green ink of the water-based pen, whereas the alcohol marker has not. And this is something that I love about alcohol markers, which is why I like to use them, is because they're much more versatile in a situation like this. If you're using a ballpoint pen, you have to wait at least like a minute, 2 minutes for it to dry before you can use a water-based pen on top of it without smudging and smearing. But for the alcohol one, you can literally wait like 10-20 seconds and it's perfectly fine, as you guys can see here. So that's definitely a pro for alcohol markers. Okay, so for the last test comparison, I'm now going to be talking about paper thickness. Like I'm gonna be pulling out 3 pieces of paper. One is 80 GSM, one is 160 GSM from my bullet journal, and one is 250 GSM from a water-based sketchbook. So these are different thicknesses. So first I'm just gonna draw one single stroke, and then I'm gonna go over on a second stroke and do multiple layers so you can really see the ink building up. Then I want to talk about blending, which, okay, before we get too far into this, I will say I am not the best blender, but I do want to talk about paper type. The one on the left is closer to copy paper, the one in the middle is bullet journaling paper, and the one on the right is water-based paper. And you'll see how that affects the blending whenever I do go in, because the thickness of the paper and the texture of the paper affects how fast the ink dries. So on the very left, when I try to blend it with a colorless blender, which basically is supposed to just drag the ink out and blend it into nothing, you can see that it does not do very well in the first one because the copy paper makes the ink dry so fast that it doesn't blend very well. On the one in the middle, this is bullet journaling paper, it's a lot smoother and it does mix a little better, but honestly, user error, it still dried a bit and it was not doing very well. On the very last one, this is water-based paper, which means it's actually quite a coarse texture, and in that case, it's not going to blend well either, not because it dries super fast, but just because the coarse texture of the paper doesn't allow for much mixing and blending of the pens. Pretty sad looking blending show right here. As you can see, none of them worked very well. I'm going to go down and blend this Sanjoki marker now with another Sanjoki marker to show instead of it blending into nothingness, it's blending into a separate color. Blending in the pink with the red, as you can see on the left, it did not do very well. It looks like two different lines on the very copy paper because it dried so fast to blend. On the middle one, it did go pretty well actually. You can kind of see a nice gradient between the pink at the top and the red at the bottom. And then on the one on the right, it's a little worse again because of the texture of the paper. All right, time for the moment of truth. Flipping over each of these 3 papers, you can see how much it bled through all of them, even the 250 GSM on the very right. There is a varying degree of ghosting and bleeding. Obviously, it's going to be worse on the thinner paper, but alcohol marker is going to get through anything. Even just one singular stroke, you can see through to the other side. Okay, so we've compared the different markers, and you're probably asking yourself, so how do we fix these issues that I'm bringing up right now? But before I tell you my secret trick, I do want to ask you guys to subscribe down below. I post bullet journaling and productivity videos every week, every Saturday, and I'd love for you guys to stick around. But anyway, my number 1 tip, brace yourself, ready? Sticker paper. The real ones on my channel know I've been using this for months, years. It always works. And let me explain. Yes, you heard me right. I said my answer is sticker paper. And before you get on me saying, oh, that's ratchet, it's ugly, it's too crafty, or maybe it's just like a stupid idea and you're just rolling your eyes at me, trust me when I say this is the solution that you've been waiting for. I'm gonna do the exact same system that I did to the other swatches of paper, but we're adding in a 4th with my lovely sticker paper. This one is from Online Labels, and when I tell you, this sticker paper is so good. Back when I had an Etsy shop, this is the sticker paper that I used to use to print all of my stickers and art prints, and it was literally amazing. But doing this exact system, you can see how much it's improved. I just did one swatch and then a multi-layer swatch, but for the blending, it blended so well on this paper. I don't even know if it's the fact that it is sticker paper or just the quality of this exact paper, but it's so smooth. The paper is so soft and smooth, zero texture, and it blended even better than the actual bullet journal paper blended, which is crazy impressive because bullet journal paper is still super smooth. Whenever you're blending 2 pens together and you go back and forth, layering the color and trying to get a good soft gradient between, for example, the pink and the red, it worked so well on this swatch, and you can definitely see the difference between a sticker paper and the rest of them. Yeah, so after it's dried, you can see that the colorless blender didn't work amazing, but it did bring some of the pink down, which is what's most important. When I flip over the paper though, this is where I want to talk about the most important part. Can you see ghosting? Yes. However, we're not actually going to just be gluing in that paper. We're pulling off that backside and using the sticker half of it. And this is why it's kind of a genius idea, not to flex, because it doesn't matter how much it bleeds through the paper. It can literally bleed through the entire paper if you wanted to, but it doesn't matter because we're just going to be sticking that on top of a journal paper. So obviously, even if it completely bled through the sticker paper, if I put it on a journal paper and flip the journal paper over, surprise, surprise, you can't see it. And this is why it's the solution that I use all the time, because it just allows you so much freedom to be able to do whatever you want on this paper with alcohol markers. No worrying about layering, bleeding, ghosting, no worrying about breaking the paper even if you go too hard, because all you have to do is tear off the back and put it into your journal, and it looks so clean and professional. But I know some of you are going to be saying it looks bad having it in a bullet journal, so let me show you some examples of times in the past where I've used sticker paper or sticker paper and alcohol markers and showing you really how good it actually looks. This was my second bullet journal 2021, and if you'll notice, there's actually a bit of sticker paper here. Now it's kind of hard to see from far away, obviously that was kind of the point, but I messed up right here and I needed to use sticker paper to cover over this blip, and you can barely even tell unless you're looking at it from super close up. Now, technically, this is just a calligraphy pen. It isn't an alcohol marker, but I could have used an alcohol marker to fix the mistake anyway because it wouldn't have bled through considering it is on sticker paper. And this time it covered up the mistake. This is my second bullet journal of last year, 2022. And if you'll see, I used sticker paper here to help with layering. And that's one thing I love about sticker paper because I like to layer all the time, like scrapbooking spreads in my bullet journal. But by having like this white outline around it, does a good job of making sure the text stands out from the glued in papers over here. But then also around the edges, you can't really notice that it's sticker paper because it blends in really well with just the pages of the journal. This over here is also a printed thing on sticker paper, and to be honest, although they are printed, they could also again be used with alcohol markers. Like if I drew this with a marker and then cut it out, it would literally work the exact same way and give the same effect. This is my first bullet journal of this year, 2023, and if you've been subscribed to me for a while, you know that I've been using a lot more braver choices with alcohol markers in my bullet journal. So I did a peephole spread for March. This first page is directly in the pages of the journal. I just had to cut out here. So this is actually with water-based marker. However, when you flip it over, this actually is a glued in piece of huge sticker paper that I drew this ballerina on. It's a little hard to tell, but maybe if the light hits it, you can see that that's actually glued on, whereas this is just completely flat paper. Now, the reason I chose to make this decision was a couple things. One, I was not super confident in my anatomy, so I wanted to make sure that if I drew it on sticker paper and messed up, I could redo it again and not mess up a page in the bullet journal. And actually I did. I don't know if you guys saw my March plan with me, which I'll link down below if you're interested, but I had a completely different pose for her, drew it, didn't like it, redrew it, and then I got to glue in the right one that I liked better, and that saved me from wasting a page in my journal. Additionally, because alcohol markers are so saturated, and as I'll talk about later, it's really easy to layer with them to get smooth swashes of color, I wanted to use an alcohol marker for the black back here, because if I used water-based marker, you'd see all the streaks. So I used alcohol instead on the sticker paper, and it makes this very pretty black over here. If I flip to one of my weekly spreads, this is another example of a ballerina I drew, and the background is done on sticker paper and with alcohol marker, and as you can see, there's really no streaks. It's a very solid black. However, when I flip the page over here, this is not sticker paper. This is just completely drawn in, and as you can see, there is a lot of marker streaks because I used water-based markers. Personally, I think there's a time and place. Sometimes you want the streaks, for example, to add texture in the flowers. I thought it was really important to keep the streaks in, but if I wanted a dark swash of color, then it's best to use alcohol markers instead. So honestly, that's why I like to experiment with both, is to try different things and see how they work with each other. Okay, so we've already established this is the solution that you guys need to try. So let me give you the best tips to be able to try it. Whether you're an absolute expert on alcohol markers, or you're just starting, or this exact video has convinced you that alcohol markers are actually a lot more worth their buck than you thought they were, let's talk about some of my best alcohol marker tips for drawing in general. I'm going to be drawing this soda bottle to put in a weekly spread, because in case you haven't seen my July plan with me video where I set up my bullet journal for July, I am doing a soda pop bottles fruit theme, and I wanted to draw a little piece of art to put in my next weekly spread, so I figured why not do it with alcohol markers and show you how easy it is to integrate into a bullet journaling spread. My first tip is, I feel like it's always better to outline before you do the color. Personally, like I showed you in the smudge test, alcohol markers are not going to smudge ink, and so whenever I do outlines, I usually use a Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen and a hard tip just to do my outlines. You can use a felt based pen, you can use a Tombow Fudenosuke like I did, you can use a ballpoint pen like I did in the smudge test earlier, you can use a darker alcohol marker, or in this case, you can use a water-based pen, ironically, because I wanted a marker that was going to have a fine tip that this sanjoki markers just so happened not to have to outline. But whatever it is, the alcohol markers very likely not going to smudge it, especially if you wait a couple seconds just to let it completely dry, even though I already believe that it's actually going to work fine even if you didn't. Personally, I just like having an outline done first because it just helps me make sure I know what I'm drawing, obviously. But if you're someone who likes just doing a pencil sketch and then doing the alcohol marker over, I would also recommend making sure that pencil sketch is mostly erased, because just like a water-based pen, if you draw with pencil and then color with a marker over it, you're gonna have a very, very low chance of actually being able to erase that pencil, and it will probably show through if the pen is light enough that you drew over it with. So it works the same way with Tombow brush pens, for example, as it does with an alcohol marker. But if you don't feel like doing line art and you're just gonna do pencil under it, make sure you really try to erase most of that pencil before you go in with the color. Another tip is I would also just go light first. Blending and layering is so much easier with alcohol markers than it is with water-based markers. I'll talk about that in a second. But if you start lighter, then you can always add shadow, whereas it's a lot harder to take away. And you might even say, like, what about the colorless blender? Like, can I use that to blend things into white or to take something away? And I really don't think so, because a colorless blender is not white ink. It is literally just plain alcohol marker fluid, I guess, with no color ink in it. So coloring a colorless blender on top of a color to make it lighter is not going to work. The only thing that may happen is it may become a little less saturated and grayed out, but I don't think that's really the effect you're looking for. It kind of is pretty ugly, and I would not recommend that at all. Now, like I mentioned earlier in this video, the alcohol marker ink may dry lighter. However, I would still recommend going light first, and even lighter than you expect, because alcohol markers are super saturated. Like, for example, in this drawing right here, I wanted to make sure the background of the soda was a super, super light pink. That way I could add the shadows, but I didn't even know if the pinks I was going to be using were light enough. So I used a step lighter that I was planning on just to make sure that it completely was light, not too saturated. Even once it dried lighter, I still wanted to double check, and then I could always go in with a darker color of pink and hues to add shadows later and build up that blending. Speaking of, you can 100% blend markers after they're dry with an alcohol marker on paper like this. This is something you 100% cannot do with water-based markers. Once those are dry, you cannot blend anything with them. But if I wanted a slightly different color, for example, I was drawing in my sketchbook a couple days ago, and I was drawing this girl's hair, and it was a slight slightly too yellowish of a brown that I wanted, so I wanted to make it closer to a pinky tone, right? But I didn't want to make it darker, and adding a pinkier brown on top of it would have made it darker. So instead of doing that, I took an actual pink marker and layered it on top of the already yellowish brown, and that changed the tint without making it darker. So this is 100% a tip that I recommend. If you can kind of play with color to make it closer to the color range that you want without changing the lightness or darkness, something like that, then I would try it, because you 100% can with markers like this. They are so open to layering, to blending, and changing colors even after they're dried. You just have to make sure you don't go overwhelmingly far with it. Whereas with a water-based marker, if you tried using a pinky color on top of a brown, it would just get muddy and gross, and you probably wouldn't even see much of a difference afterwards because it just wouldn't want to blend and mix. Another problem with water-based markers, like I mentioned earlier, is they do get super streaky. So if you're coloring with them, you're going to see the lines of overlap. It's kind of transparent because it's based with water. Alcohol markers, you do not do this at all. If you want to get rid of the streaks when you're coloring in something, just go over it a second time while it's wet and just make sure you kind of cover all the bases, and it'll all dry like a flat layer. Kind of like how I was talking about earlier with the ballerina pages in my bullet journal. There are no streaks if you use an alcohol marker and just blend it in super well. The last thing I'm adding to this soda bottle with my strawberries and my watermelon, which I think is super cute, are white highlights, because what's the point of a soda bottle if you don't have the white highlights added to it? So I pulled out a Uniball white gel pen to add some shine to the bottle, and I would say that this works so much better on alcohol marker than a water-based marker because, like I said, it is based in water. The white gel pen does have a tendency to kind of bleed into that color, so if you used white on top of a purple, the white gel pen would kind of turn lavendery and mix with the purple. Don't ask me why, this is just what happens. However, with the alcohol marker, it just stays right on top. If you wait for it to finish drying, which only takes a couple, like 30 seconds by the way, like we confirmed with the smudge test, the white gel pen will just stay right on top and there'll be no problem with having that perfect shine because it will not sink into the ink one bit. I hope these tips have kind of convinced you guys that alcohol markers are literally one of my favorite art stationery supplies. Even though I have a bullet journal that I use it in mostly, there are ways to use it and make it look good. I mean, look at this finished drawing. I love how this turned out. So 100% big thank you to Sanjoki for sending me their 120 alcohol marker set. I love how these markers perform, and they are a cheaper option in comparison to hugely famous markers like Ohuhu and Copic markers. Gosh, those are so expensive without the price tag, but still really good quality. So I will have a link in the description box below for you to check Sanjoki out along with the discount code. I really hope you guys enjoy using these markers, but let me be known around the internet that I am the bullet journaling with alcohol markers queen. I've made a video about this in the past, but I do hope that this one has kind of given you a little more value and explained a little better, since that was 2 years ago. And overall, I have more experience using alcohol markers now, so I'm really glad I got to show you guys my techniques, and we can twin together with alcohol markers in our bullet journal. It's a new era, guys, I'm sure of it. Do let me know in the comments below if you've heard of this tip before, if it's from me or someone else. I know a lot of people on YouTube don't talk about this at all, but I'm like, there's so many pros using alcohol markers, you just have to find the right way to use them. And subscribe, because I post bullet journaling and productivity videos every week, and I mean, if I'm giving you such good knowledge like this, why don't you want to stick around? And with that, check out this video on the screen here where I set my goals for the third quarter of 2023, and I also have a free goal setting template for you guys, 100% free. Go check it out.